Welcome to Chats by Christ. I'm Shali.
I'm having dinner.
Hi, having dinner. I'm Shali.
Hey, it's Desh. Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, he's a hungry boy. He's a real hungry hippo today.
I really thought that I could, finish work at 5 and then go to the gym and come back and do this podcast recording.
What happened?
But,
Too busy getting shredded. Took too
yeah,
long.
man.
So
hmm
now you gotta get your protein in you. I gotta get protein.
You do, man, you do.
Yes.
It's not even protein, like, you just need to get nutrients. Oh,
I
don't know, I
eat.
say that, but like, you eat better than me.
I don't know what I'm doing wrong, man. Like, okay, maybe I need to go, like, jog. But I try. But yeah, I'm sick again. That's just my destiny, my lot in life, my cross to bear, as it were.
Mm.
But enough about us. We're getting back on the commandments train. 2 episodes ago, we started Commandment 6. We got about halfway through, so we're going to finish it off.
Yep.
So, in the catechism, we were up to, I think we're starting from paragraph 2360 onwards.
Yeah, so I think we covered the first 2 sections of the catechism for this commandment. So the first section was male and female, he created them.
Yep.
And then the second part was about the vocation to chastity specifically.
Yep.
Now we're up to the third part. So that's specifically regarding the love of husband and wife.
Yep. So to sum up the main point we discussed in the last episode, we sort of looked at chastity from the angle of integrity, not being controlled by your passions and not being a slave to you, basically, and like ordering your use of sex properly for your own selfish pleasure. And that's that was like for anyone in any state of life. And from here onwards, these next 2 sections, which is the love of husband and wife and offenses against the dignity of marriage, these 2 sections are about marriage, like Catholic marriage specifically. So bit less fundamental, but also surprisingly still goes to fundamentals. Now, obvious disclaimer, me and Desh are not married, so our experience is limited.
Thanks for reminding me.
I'm sorry. Hey, it hurts me more, right? You have a girlfriend at least. I'm alone and sad and sick. Got no one. Got nothing. I have a gaming headset. I don't even use that anymore.
Your pizza hoodie's pretty cool.
I mean, yeah, your pizza hoodie's pretty
man.
cool.
Yeah, we found out today we have the same pizza hoodie.
Yep.
Anyway,
Anyway.
I was gonna say before, I think the beauty of the catechism is I guess that essentially ties back to scripture as well. Specifically, well, what not even specifically like regarding like all of the commandments really, except obviously the first one is that they really all sort of connect back to that dignity of the human person, and maintaining that sanctity, whether the person is living or dead, married or single or living out their vocation. I think it's all about maintaining that dignity, which I think is probably makes things, especially sort of if you don't understand some things, a little bit easier to digest. Like if you're thinking about in the context of I have to avoid this rather than thinking, all right, this is something that I need to avoid. Like this is something that I should be doing to protect the people that I care about and to like maintain their dignity. It's probably just makes things a little bit easier to digest, I guess.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts.
Yeah. Like in part 1, sorry, I got a cough lolly. I'm dying.
No, it's okay.
Like in part 1, we spent a lot of time talking a fundamental of integrity, and I'll probably end up doing a lot of that here too. Spoiler alert. Because yeah, like these commandments about sexuality aren't but like Desh was saying, they're not about just like putting limits on what you can and can't do, and like what kinds of fun quote you can and can't have. But it's about these fundamentals of human dignity and human dignity and integrity, all these sorts of things. So I think before we dive into the catechism, get into like the specifics and the rules, one thing I want to explore a little bit is why Christians and Catholics limit sex to marriage. I think we sort of touched on it in part 1, but I'm going to pull out C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity again and pull out the image that I spoke in part 1, which was the idea of that man and woman, they become like a violin and a bow as a single musical instrument. And like in that image, I think It's not really. It doesn't say it explicitly, but like the implication of this kind of image is that the music, quote unquote, the instrument, like that's what sex is.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take that to its complete end, like what it ends up meaning is that sex is a part of much more larger scale union between man and woman. And so it's not just like the physical pleasure, but it includes emotional, spiritual, mental. Like the idea of the one flesh is it's not just like a body thing, but it's like a person thing.
Mm-hmm.
The man and the woman pretty much become like a single personal entity as much as they can be in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, this sort of union, like you can't isolate the pleasure from the rest of the union. And I think, we sort of spoke about this last part one. But then if you're going to have such a total union, this is like really serious, right? It's it's two entire beings, offered to each other. And so to break this union is to effectively cut this united person into.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you and me can both relate, right? Had relationships that have ended.
Mm.
And, sure, we move on, but like there's always that sense that that relationship ended, but these relationships are pretty close. Like something is gone now, yeah?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so, this is a big, important relationship that, yeah, sex is part of a bigger and like, super important relationship. And the church recognizes the dignity of this relationship. And so all these rules and stuff is protection, basically. It upholds the dignity of this relationship. And to tie into the rest of it, like the key about the rules isn't like, oh, they're just rules enforced. The key about the rules is specifically vows that the husband and wife make to each other in the eyes of God. So, spoilers for the rest of the episode. I'm going to harp on these vows and the importance of sticking to your more so than.
Yeah.
But yeah, with that in mind, now we can look at the catechism with that sort of framework, vows and inherent dignity, more so than just pleasure, because it's not really about pleasure.
Yeah. So there's like I don't know if you guys have read. I think you've read this book, Shali, by Christopher West. It's called Good News About Sex and Marriage. But he, Christopher West talks a bit more about this, obviously. And one of the things he says, so basically the format of the book is, it's really good because it answers questions that people commonly have about marriage and chastity within marriage, just in general, like the act of intercourse. And one of the questions, I was just having a flick through. So say someone asks you, marriage is just as much a spiritual union as a physical one. So what if you can't have sex? And basically his other response is, this is certainly true, but the two realities, physical and spiritual. So there's two realities when you look at any form of relationship, cannot be separated without falling into serious error about human identity. So, like, at that point, like, you're not even just like it becomes a question of like identity. Like, it goes back to like by I think so. He's talking about. I had the thought in my head when I read this, and now it's gone.
I'll try and
Like,
guess what it was for you, but like, are you trying to?
I think. Oh, yeah,
Are
here it
you
is.
trying to get at like the body soul
Yeah. So
unity? Like,
So it says that the truth is that the human identity is found in the marriage of flesh and spirit. So then, it does talk about the soul. So the soul itself is not an immaterial self housed in a non-spiritual body. Rather, the soul is what makes the body, and not just the body, but like a person, like somebody. Hence, why he mentioned like those two realities combine into like identity. Yeah.
to sum it up in a way that's probably still confusing, we are our souls and we are our bodies, right? So like, it's not like I'm an internal like identity or psyche or be inside like a meat sack. I'm not like a meat Gundam or something with like a soul pilot, and the soul pilot is like what the actual me. Like this body, this frail, sickly, toothpick body, is me. Like I am this. This is me.
and it's one with the soul.
Yeah, yeah. Like they're it's hard to explain because they're distinct, but like
Yeah,
together
exactly.
in the way that like the the book itself says like a marriage of body and soul. Like it's that same idea of like two becoming one.
Yeah,
To the
exactly.
point
You
where
can't have
like
one without the other.
mm, and that's why like I can't remember where I heard this, but maybe it is Christopher West or someone else. But like
Mm-hmm.
a corpse, like a dead body, is a body without a soul, and we
Mm-hmm.
recognize that as inhuman. You know, no one likes to look at a corpse.
Mm-hmm.
And then likewise, you know, a ghost, you know, spooky ghost, ooh, is a
Mm-hmm.
soul without a body,
Yeah.
and we also recognize that there's an element of inhuman in that as well,
Mm.
and we're rightfully wary of it. But yeah,
Yeah.
body soul tangents aside,
Yeah.
like this is all high level stuff. Like we can't really skim all these fundamentals in
No,
20
definitely not.
minutes and then get into the commandments, the commandment proper. But yeah, I think like those are the three fundamentals that like inform
Yeah, I think
the
so.
uh the Catholic conception of marriage is the body soul union,
Mm-hmm.
then like the union of the two persons, right?
Yeah.
So like there's two instances of two becoming one,
Yep.
and then the last one is vows,
Yep.
which yeah. So going on to the catechism,
Yep.
I think like the first few paragraphs sort of skim on what, but not really.
I think the first few specifically talk about like the concept of sexuality itself,
mm,
before it goes into like the union between man and woman.
yeah,
Like 2360 and 2361. They're like almost definitions of like the term sexuality itself.
yep,
2360. So it starts off by saying sexuality is ordered to the conjugal. Excuse me. Sexuality is ordered to the conjugal love of man and woman. In marriage, the physical intimacy of spouses becomes a sign and pledge of spiritual communion. Marriage bonds between baptized persons are sanctified by the sacrament.
yep. That's important to note for later. Is that
Mm,
in the church, matrimony, marriage is a sacrament, like baptism,
yeah.
and so Catholic marriage has the involvement of God, and it comes with special graces.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you mentioned sign and pledge of spiritual communion,
Hmm.
which is an interesting phrasing.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of talk. I think it's definitely a way to describe that like full person union that I was describing.
Yeah.
That like
It actually links back to my catechism got a link back to 1601 where it specifically talks about the sacrament of matrimony.
oh yeah.
So here it talks about, so I'll read out 1601 because it's sort of connected. So it says that the matrimonial covenant by which a man and woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life is it by its nature ordered towards the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. This covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of the sacrament. And that can be, traced back to canon law. So that's part of the canon law as well. That,
Mm.
like the sacraments, like supports this union, in the context of marriage.
Mm. Sorry, I'm blanking.
So,
Thought I had a thought, but no.
um,
Anyway, yeah.
I guess
Keep
that's 2360.
Yep.
So like that specifically speaks of the sacrament.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2361 goes into still talking about sexuality. So it states that sexuality by means of which man and woman give themselves to one another through the acts, which are proper and exclusive to spouses. So that's important to note as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not simply something that's biological, but it concerns the innermost being of the person as such. So that sort of talks about what we were talking about before and what Christopher West is saying in his book. How it goes back to not like just the physical level, but like goes back to like the identity of the person as well. And then he goes on to say, but concerns the innermost being. Oh, sorry, I read that already. It is realized in a truly human way only if it is an integral part of love, by which a man and woman commit themselves totally to one another until death. It's quite beautiful.
Mm. Yeah.
I guess that paragraph is fairly self-explanatory. Like it's basically just saying sexuality in itself is not something that's limited to simply the biological, but goes back to like this. It's connected to like the souls of the individuals involved as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like with image, right? Like it's the entire person ought to be employed in use of sexuality.
Yeah.
It is like you use your sexuality in service to your spouse. I think it's in that book, Good News About Sex and Marriage. Christopher West describes the sexual act as the renewal of the marriage vows. I can't remember where exactly. It's basically like this is like the bodily way renewing or ratifying your marriage vows, and so sex is like proper and properly ordered to the degree that it can to the marriage vows.
Yeah. I'm trying to see if I can find the exact phrasing, but nothing happened on for the moment, which is fine. I think you summed it up pretty well, actually.
Then yeah, paragraphs 2362 and 2363 sort of again just like talk about the purpose of sexuality in more detail. So to skim over both of them, 2362 basically says that like the sexual act is good within the context of marriage and when it's done by spouses, given that they are self-giving and like it's mutual self-giving, right? Going back to part 1, like you don't engage your sexuality for your own pleasure. You engage it for its rightful end. And the pleasure is a byproduct and a good byproduct. The church and God doesn't condemn the pleasure, but the pleasure isn't like... And then 2363 explains the primary ends of sexuality, which is the good of the spouses themselves and the transmission of life. And it says that you can't separate these ends from each other or from sexuality without, 1, altering the couple's spiritual life, and 2, compromising the goods of the marriage and the family itself. That's pretty big, right? Especially in this economy. People probably disagree with that second part of like, if I don't follow these things, like, is it really compromise the health of my marriage, a future of my family? A lot of people would say no. But if we go back to our fundamentals, we can very easily why that would be the case, which you might get to once we start looking at the offenses. So then the catechism moves on into conjugal fidelity, and it talks about like the covenant between the spouses. And so before we go into that, I want to, because the catechism doesn't mention traditional Catholic wedding vows, not within this commandment, in the section about marriage itself, the sacrament.
I think so.
But yeah, so if you can that up, if it's there, because I'm trying to remember it, I'll have it quite down.
61, around marriage in God's plan, ceremony, the celebration of marriage, consent.
Because we're going to talk about fidelity to vows, what the vows are.
I feel like I'm in the right place.
It might be in the West book. I've got the digital copy, so
you can search. Nice.
Yeah.
Stay with us.
Okay, okay, so I couldn't find the actual list, but
I'll keep looking.
I'll waffle because I think I'm more confident in my memory. We'll put it that way. There's the vows I think that we'd all be familiar with, are like, the vows that you hear in the movies or what have you, is that you promise to have and hold your spouse through richer and poorer, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do you part. So, like, the priest asks both spouses that question, they say, I do, and with God as their witness. So, that's the first vow, right? The second vow that, like, Catholics do agree to, the second set of vows, is a set of 4 Fs, basically. And not Fs. 4 words, right? The marriage, they vow to have a marriage that is free, total, faithful, and fruitful. So free means like freely given, so full and total consent. It's not inhibited or anything. So, in the eyes of the Catholic Church and in the eyes of God, a marriage that's a marriage of like coercion or a drunken shotgun Vegas wedding, like they're not legitimate marriages. They're not real marriages. That free component. Total. Total means total is probably the highest level concept, but it's that like idea of the two becoming one. You give your entire person to the other person. Excuse me. Faithful is faithful to that person and faithful to the vows that you made. So, yeah, like you have one spouse, they're your spouse. No, you can't go having romances with anyone else because you promised to be faithful to that spouse. And fruitful means open to children. You and your spouse promise to not do anything to impede childbirth.
Yep.
So, with that in mind, with that in mind, we can start looking at fidelity to both of these sets of vows, right? And like why fidelity is important. And like mere Christianity sort of sums it up pretty good, because fidelity isn't even about like chastity. It's not about sex. It's not about any of that anymore.
Yeah.
Fidelity is the core fundamental of being honest and sticking to your word. And so, C.S. Lewis talks about people who like make the vows with no intention of keeping them. Let me see the best place. All right, yeah. Now, everyone who has been married in a church has made a public, solemn promise to stick to his or her partner till death. The duty of keeping that promise has no special connection with sexual morality. It is in the same position as any other promise. If, as modern people are always telling us, the sexual impulse is just like all our other impulses, then it ought to be treated like all our other impulses. And as their indulgence is controlled by our promises, so should its be. If, as I think, it is not like all our other impulses, but is morbidly influenced, then we should be specially careful not to let it lead us into dishonesty. To this, someone may reply that he regarded the promise made in church as a mere formality and never intended to keep it. Whom then? Sorry?
Yeah.
Whom then was he trying to deceive when he made it? God? That was really very unwise. Himself? That was not very much wiser. The bride or bridegroom or the in-laws? That was treacherous. More often, I think, the couple, or one of them, hoped to deceive the public. They wanted the respectability that is attached to marriage without intending to pay the price. That is, they were impostors. They cheated. If they are still contented cheats, I have nothing to say to them. Who would urge the high and hard duty of chastity on people who have not yet wished to be merely honest? It's that last sentence that I wanted to build up to, right? Like, a lot of a lot of the sins against marriage specifically, a lot of the offenses against marriage specifically, can be classed as a breach of your marriage vows, right? And so it's not about like, we want to repress your sexuality or repress the pleasure you have. It's, especially if you're a Catholic, right? Like you made a promise. We're just asking you to stick to your word. So yeah, that's fidelity in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Now we can get to the real unpopular one. Fecundity. What if you like to walk us through that one, Desh?
Yeah, sure. I'm looking at 2366, which is the first reference to fecundity, but it doesn't seem to specifically define it. I mean, yeah, we'll just go through the catechism. And we need to define it. We can. So it basically talks about how fecundity. I'll read and then
for
you're gonna look
yeah.
up. Yeah, perfect. So fecundity is a gift, an end of marriage. So it's another means. Yeah, so it's another end of marriage for conjugal love naturally tends to be fruitful. So fruitful meaning being the openness to being bearing children. A child does not come from outside as something added on to the mutual love of spouses, but springs forth from the very heart of that mutual giving as its fruit and fulfillment. So basically, the child should be considered a reward of this fulfillment. Like it shouldn't be considered like a burden or anything like that. So hence the church, which is always on the side of life, teaches that it is necessary that each and every marriage act remain ordered per se to the procreation of human life. So this particular doctrine, which is expounded on numerous occasions by the magisterium, so it's based on the inseparable connection, which was established by God, in which man, on his own initiative, he cannot break it, between the unitive significance and procreative significance, which are both inherent to the marriage act. So that last bit was a bit of a mouthful. But essentially, like it's saying that uh, man should not and is not like able to separate the unitive significance. So the unitive being between man and woman, and the procreative significance. Procreative, obviously, being the openness to bearing children. So man is not able to separate those, because obviously they're both inherent to the marriage act.
Yep. What God has joined, man cannot tear. The Gospels, the Lord. So yeah, looked up fecundity. Fecundity means the ability to produce offspring or new growth, fertility. So basically, openness to life, fruitfulness, that sort of thing. Did I have something else? No, that was it. Yeah. So
Yeah, cool.
wait, it was about the a child does not come from outside has something added on. Where are my notes? I recently finished reading 3 to Get Married by Venerable Fulton. Do I call him Cardinal? Venerable Cardinal Fulton. He's not
I
a
think
cardinal.
Venerable Fulton Sheen is okay.
Venerable Fulton.
That is his title. Yeah.
Yeah. So I read that book, 3 to Get Married. Great book. Bit too smart for me, so I got to read it again sometime down the track. But a theme that kept coming up in that book is this idea that children, like a child, can be considered as like a mini incarnation of the love of the spouses, right? So like how the Lord Jesus is the incarnation of God's love, like God Himself on earth. The love of husband and wife takes on flesh in the form of the child, and that's not a way of looking at kids that like the modern world looks at. Yeah, look, the modern world doesn't look at kids in that way. Kids at best are like a burden.
In
Like
pretty much
kids,
every sense of the word, yeah, it's very sad. Like financially, like some people think that they're a burden to like living your life, that you can't, like, once you have kids, it's like over for you.
I mean, like there is not to say like it's true, but like obviously raising a kid like hard work and it takes resources and it takes sacrifice.
Yeah, but like it's not like it's new life in every sense of the word. Like it's sort of, it's a different stage of your life.
But like the idea that like it's tough, right? Because as Catholics, we are inundated with this idea of love and sacrifice being effectively, sacrifice being some of love, right? We just came out of Easter, but we couldn't get to Good Friday, resurrection with the crucifixion, right? And so, like, I don't know how to, because I don't want to dismiss the concerns of anyone who's like actually, right?
Oh yeah,
Their kids,
absolutely
or like
not.
anyone who is worried that like, because yeah, like kids take sacrifice, obviously.
Like that sacrifice, I guess, is fundamental.
Like this is a harsh thing to imply, being someone who is, to say that is reluctant to have kids is not capable of full sacrifice. I mean, it might be true, it might not, depend on the person. So let's not get into any of that.
Yeah.
But I don't know, just on an intuitive sense, people talk about like love, right? Love is love, to quote one slogan. But there's an awful lack of love for children, especially new children, but even just young children that exist, right?
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I don't really know the solution for it, but we're called to love. Yeah, openness to life is important. Viewing the child as a gift is important. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, like the child should be seen ideally as a reward, as 2366 sort of implies, which sometimes, I guess, like you say,
Even reward isn't quite. I'm reading ahead to like the IVF stuff, right? Spoilers. They are a gift.
Yeah.
And it's a gift that like isn't like you shouldn't deny a gift.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know how to explain it in a way that's gentle and isn't just like go have baby, because it's not necessarily that clear cut, and that's nuance of infant, all that sort of thing.
Mm.
Unless I like skip ahead to I don't know actually. Unless I skip like back into something that's in good news about sex and marriage,
Mm-hmm.
is the idea that your own fertility is a part of yourself, and
Yeah.
marriage requires a complete gift of self, and you
Mm-hmm.
vow to give that complete gift of self.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you cut off or limit your own fertility deliberately, you are holding back a part of yourself from your spouse. And if you force your spouse to, get a vasectomy or tubes tied or take contraceptive or any of that sort of thing, then you're refusing to accept your spouse in their entirety,
Mm.
because your spouse has fertility and you have fertility. It's a part of your body and it's a part of your human person. So it's that angle, which completely sidesteps any questions of resources or responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
economic. But it's a sidestep, so
Yeah.
yeah. But I guess it comes back to like children being the natural end result. Like, you should be open. Can't
Yeah.
you can't demand them, but you also can't reject.
Yeah. I think that, yeah, the last thing spot on. Yeah. Yeah. So
Just
that's
gonna
fecundity.
yeah.
Do you
We'll
have
give
anything
you
else to add to that?
no. I just want to give a time check. That's all.
Oh, yeah. We're at
We're at
43.
40. Yeah.
Yeah, we better get moving, actually.
Look, the offenses we can skim. Got skim
Mm-hmm.
notes for those.
Mm-hmm.
I think fecundity and gift of a child we need to,
Mm.
because this is like a big one.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
It's like, yeah, this is the last fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth fundamental informs the rules, is
Yeah.
how we view children. So yeah, got to touch on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Does NFP fall under actually?
what was that?
Where does NFP fall under? I don't think it's explicitly mentioned in the catechism, is it? Or maybe not
No, it's
in
not
this
explicitly, but
command.
2368 talks about regulation of procreation.
Yeah, exactly.
2370 talks about periodic continence,
Mm-hmm.
that is the methods of birth regulation based on self-observation and the use of infertile periods,
Mm.
which is basically what NFP
That's
is.
basically
NFP
NFP,
is
yeah.
the fancy name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the woman isn't fertile every single day of every single month, right?
Mm-hmm.
She has a cycle. There are
Yep.
times where you perform the marital act and she doesn't conceive a child, and if you just do the act, ugh, help, help.
Yeah. Oh,
um,
no, you didn't say anything wrong, yeah.
okay, good. Yeah, like yes, if you perform the marital embrace, and your wife is in the infertile time, there's no conception, that's fine, right?
Mhm.
It's because that's like the problem is contraception, right?
Mm.
And the problem is so any form of contraception, and the sin of ownage is where the seed doesn't go in. Help, I'm blushing. If the seed doesn't go where it's meant to go,
Yeah.
if you spill it outside of the body onto the
Yeah.
ground,
Yeah,
which is what
exactly.
Onan did, right?
Mhm.
Then like that's effectively contraception as well, right? You are
Like the act,
completely denying the possibility, right?
yeah, like every act of sexuality, first of all, has to have like the openness to children, but also like yeah, like essentially it needs to, like, the end result is that it needs to essentially, yeah, like the seed needs to, yeah, this is, yeah, how do people phrase this?
I don't even know if good news does it in a way.
Yeah,
But basically,
it
the
needs
key
to,
the key word
the
is
seed
openness,
needs to openness, yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
you need to do everything in your power
Yeah.
that you can do to
The act needs
like
to finish in a
guarantee.
natural way.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
the end of the act needs to end in such a way that like a
Yeah.
child can be born or like can be conceived from this. If you deliberately obstruct that,
Yeah. Deliberation, yeah.
that's bad. And I'm sure like some person's gonna be like, oh, but if you snipe the infertile period, then you're also deliberately obstructing.
Not necessarily, because if
yeah.
you're still open to children during that period, then that's not an obstruction per se.
I think in Good News, like Christopher West likens it to invitations. So, um, to perform the act in the infertile time is like sending an invite to someone when you know they can't attend. You good, Dash? Yep. Yeah, so like you're not deliberately obstructing the child. It is a factor outside of your control, even though you know that the factor is in play.
Yeah, yeah,
Like we're not called to min max the amount of kids we have. We're not called to maximize the amount. Like we said earlier, kids are kids do take resources, and so
yeah.
there's an element
Like
of
at certain stages of your life, yeah, it is not wrong to, yeah.
yeah, like depending on your state in life, there is an element of possibly like sinfulness in trying to have too many kids than more kids than you can handle, right?
You need to be able to
Um,
provide for them more effectively.
yeah, like because it's not just about giving birth, right? You owe the kid like everything, right? Christianity, Catholicism, especially because Catholicism is the one no one likes. Catholicism is the religion that demands everything, right? If you
Yeah,
want to get married, you give everything. You want to have a kid, you give everything.
yeah.
So, like, and that giving of everything, because everyone is slightly and has different, there's nuance, which, like, I for one hate absolutely because it makes things very complicated. I got to figure all this stuff out for myself in the sense that everybody else, I can't do what someone else does because the situation is different. But that fundamental principle of, like, it feels like splitting hairs, right? Like, if you take the contraceptive pill, you are like 100% not open to children, yeah? If you aim for the infertile period, there is still a chance of conception occurring, right? And so if you try to snipe the infertile period with a contraceptive mindset of like I don't want a child, then like if you do get a child, then suddenly you get all this talk of INFP is unreliable, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's true, like there are studies that show that it's actually quite reliable if you do it properly. Whatever. It's a question of like mindset, right? Like you have sex prepared to have a child, but like you have sex the infertile time because it's like, look, like maybe we're not ready just yet. We think that we expect there to not be a, but at the same time, we know what we're getting into. Like a child is the natural end, or is a natural end result, and so if a child does come, good, okay. That does that sound right? Is that openness?
I think you've pretty much covered, yeah. Like every element of openness. Like even with NFP, there is an element of openness, like that is required. It's not a one-stop solution.
Yeah, it's not a question of like external behaviors. It's
Yeah,
fundamentals, right?
yeah,
You gotta be integrity, right? You gotta not be ruled by your pursuit of pleasure.
yeah.
You gotta stick to your damn word when you get married and you make vows.
Mhm.
And openness to children is an attitude and not an external.
Yeah.
Like you go into sex with with the attitude of like I'm okay if my wife gets pregnant. I'm okay if I get pregnant. And yeah, like a lot of injustice happens when those fundamentals get neglected, and those fundamentals are hard to do. Yeah, rant. Hopefully,
Good rant. Good rant. Very profound.
I hope so. These are discussions I can't have.
Do we? So we're
We got to
going
talk
through
about
it.
IVF,
Yes.
which is 237 onwards.
Yeah. So 2373. So that section is going back to the gift of a child. So 2373. So sacred scripture, church traditional practices. Consider large families a sign of God's blessing. And a sign of the parents' generosity. And then 2374. So that's this one specifically speaks of couples who discover that they are sterile, so unable to have children, and speaks of their suffering, which is great. And then specifically it references Abraham, so from Genesis. So what will you give me? Asked Abraham of God, for I continue childless. And Rachel cries to her husband Jacob, give me children or I shall die. Yeah, so obviously, right, that was but before Rachel was beholden her son, so she was barren, and that was unfortunate. Not unfortunate. That was part of God's plan, but that was something that Abraham and Rachel had prayed to God to for a number of
Yeah,
years.
it's painful, right? Like
It's painful. They
it,
suffered greatly. Yeah.
yeah, like there are people who want children and are unable
Yeah.
to have them because game sucks. Like,
Mm, mm,
um, and so like 2375 to talk about research aimed at reducing human sterility
mhm,
and how overall it's a good thing as long as it's in the service of the person, the of rights, the true and integral according to the design and will of God. And so 2376 and 2377 are where it gets controversial,
yeah.
right? This is where we got to go back to fundamentals, right?
Mhm,
Earlier we mentioned that the end of sex, the two ends of sex are unity of the spouses and the development of children.
mhm,
And then pleasure is a secondary end, right? And the fundamental attitude to sex is that you pursue all of the ends, right? So commonly we hear like, okay, so you have to be open to kids, and that's like all you ever hear. You have to have sex and be open to kids.
mhm.
The inverse of this coin, which is what these next two paragraphs talk about, is that if you want kids, you cannot separate kids from the unity of the spouses,
Mm,
from mom and dad.
in the sexual act.
I'll let you read.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, 2366, sorry, 2376, details that. So techniques that entail the dissociation of husband and wife by the intrusion of a person other than the couple, so bringing in someone from outside the marital relationship. So this can be through the form of donation of sperm or ovum, so eggs, or in the form of a surrogate uterus as well. So all of these techniques, so to speak, are gravely immoral. These techniques, um, then it specifically mentions heterologous artificial insemination. Uh, I don't remember what the commonplace term for that is. And fertilizations.
Uh,
I guess the whole, like,
Insemination, fertilization.
I guess that whole process is IVF, right?
Uh,
Like
yeah,
together. When they,
IVF is one of them. Yeah, in
yeah, yeah,
vitro fertilization. Surrogacy is another type.
yep, yep.
Um, those are the two big
Um,
ones.
yeah,
Surrogacy is one these days, and can of worms
yeah.
about that.
But yeah, effectively, these techniques infringe the child's right to be born of a mother and father that are known to him and that are bound to each other by marriage. They betray the spouse's right to become a mother and father only through each other.
Yep.
Yeah. And
You keep
then
going
23,
to do 2377, and
77.
then I can rant.
Yeah. So then it talks about the utilization of these techniques within the married couple, which it states are perhaps less reprehensible. However, they yet remain morally unacceptable. And this is because they dissociate the sexual act from the procreative act. So these two come hand in hand. You cannot separate them. One comes, yeah, with the other essentially. And the act which brings the child into existence is no longer an act by which two persons give themselves to one another, but one that entrusts the life and identity of the embryo into the powers of doctors, biologists, and establishes the domination of technology over the origin and destiny of the human person. So essentially, at that point, you are, you're putting your trust in the medical field rather than the miracle of life, so to speak, because it is a miracle, like the whole process of conception
Hmm.
from start to finish. Such a relationship, so continue on, so such a relationship of domination is in itself contrary to dignity and equality that must be common to parents and children. And under the moral aspect, procreation is deprived of its proper perfection when it's not willed as the fruit of the conjugal act. That is to say, the specific act of the spouse's union, so the sexual act, and only respect for the link between the meanings of the conjugal act and respect for the unity of the human being make possible procreation in conformity with the dignity of the person.
Yep.
Yeah, so basically that the respect for the link between procreation and the conjugal act needs to be there
Hmm.
in order to maintain the dignity not only of the parents but also of the child that's being conceived.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. And then 2378. Did you have anything to add?
Do 2378, and then I'll let loose.
Yeah, sure. So 2378. So going back to a child is not something that's owed to someone, but it's a gift. Children are the supreme gift of marriage. In this, like the idea of the human person. A child may not be considered a piece of property, an idea to which is an alleged, like I guess the right, the idea of thinking that the right to a child, like to having a child, would lead to this sort of presumption that like a child is a piece of property.
Mhm.
And in this area, only the child possesses genuine rights. So the right to be the fruit of the specific act of the conjugal love of his parents, and the right to be respected as a person from the moment of his conception.
Okay, so there's a few things that the Catechism doesn't mention about this issue. When it comes to stuff like surrogacy and IVF, what tends to happen, a common occurrence, is that it's not just like one embryo that gets implanted. They make a bunch of embryos. They pick the quote unquote viable one to. What this means is that you have a bunch of leftover, quote unquote, leftover embryos that are conceived, right? Like they are fully human, went through with commandment from the abortion stuff.
Yep.
That's all what happens to these embryos. They either get aborted or they get experimented on, right? Like these are people. These are people who are getting murdered. And so, there's a darker side to this sort of technique. Another thing, surrogacy, right? We talked about how we can't view children as property, right? We're not owed a child. A big problem with surrogacy is that it reduces a woman to an incubator. And so there's a brand new and horrific form of human trafficking involved surrogacy. Women straight up just get like battery farm incubators for rich donors, which isn't right. So the Catechism doesn't talk about the secondary evils attached to these things because these things are already, gravely disordered of themselves. Because again, the fundamental is that sex is a full package, open to life, union of man and wife, husband and wife, and it's fun. It's secondary, it's pleasurable. The two primary ends, union of the spouses and the development of children. Like I mentioned earlier, Fulton J. Sheen, Venerable Fulton Sheen talks about the children as a incarnation of the love of the spouses. And so family, like if you want to make a family, like the ideal is like this is the ideal, right? And you want to aim for the ideal. Now, I know that there are couples out there who have used IVF. They've had a happy, healthy kid, and they're happy, healthy. So like if you're that kid, like that's not to say that you're a mistake and you're horrible and you shouldn't exist or anything like that, right? Like the Lord knit you together. He loves you all the same. What we're trying to talk about here isn't individual people at this point, right? The fundamentals are abstractions. The ideals is marriages and not laboratories. But like that's not to say that God can't, bring you back into the fold. That's not to say that God won't forgive you. It's not to say that God doesn't love you. He did these things or a result of these things. But
And morally unacceptable, but it doesn't. Like the ability forgiven.
yeah, like these are actions that denied your dignity, right? Just in and of themselves. The spouses of the child of the surrogate mother of the surrogate woman, the woman acting as the surrogate. I don't know what the technical term, right? Like it denies, like it denies the dignity of all parties involved, except for maybe the scientist. But the scientist denies his own dignity, in the sense that he's not acting strictly speaking. But an act that denies your dignity doesn't mean you have no dignity. It means that you're respected.
Yeah.
So, if you're a child of IVF, it's good that you're here, right? The Lord wants you here. It is the Lord who gives life, and it's the Lord who takes it away.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing in worms. But it's the Lord who gives life, right? So if you have life, like the Lord, for a reason, and the simple reason is he loves you, right?
Mm.
If you're parents of a kid of IVF or surrogacy, he gave that kid that life because he loves that kid and he loves you.
Yeah.
It's not like he doesn't want you to have blessings.
Yeah, 100%.
But like this isn't optimal. This isn't good.
Mm.
I don't really have much else to say to it because I'm just a schmuck. I'm single, childless, uneducated schmuck with a microphone. I'm just reading the catechism and interpreting.
Do you remember that story in Hello about the guy? So he had worked in I don't specifically remember which field he worked in, but he worked in like the whole he worked in the laboratory. I think he was like a researcher in regards to I think it was like IVF. And then he'd gone home and he'd seen his. Oh wait, no, that's it. He was. It's a little bit tangential. But I think
That's
it
what,
sort
yeah.
of sums up. So he worked in like genetics, research in genetics, so like genetic modification. And then he'd gone home, and he'd seen his two children, and he'd observed, them and like how different they were, how they were a gift to him. And yeah, he basically come to the conclusion that like what he was doing, the research he was into, the research he was doing, like it wasn't natural, like it was altering something that's meant to be unaltered, essentially. Like it needs to be allowed its due natural course. And because of that, effectively, he stopped working in that field of work. He completely switched up. And it's a little bit tangential because, yeah, obviously he worked in genetic modification and IVF or any other of these techniques. But I think like that story shows so much more like the gift of a child and like how important it is for the natural order of things to be respected.
It's not as tangential because I think I remember what you taught. I think like his work involved with stem cells, like stem cells.
Yeah, I think so.
So like he was directly working with fetuses, conceived fetuses, embryos.
Yeah, true.
And so
Yeah, that's true.
him
They
seeing
would
his
have been
kids like that.
conceived. Yeah, they would have been conceived through IVF. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, no one really talks about the IVF aspect.
Yeah.
Like, no one talks about the flip side of the whole, sex and babies go together coin. Sex and babies go together. Babies and sex go together. I mean, that sucks in its own ways, but it's.
I think what
you gotta do what's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of what's right, we are over time, and we still haven't looked at the last section of offenses against the dignity of marriage.
Yep.
So I'm just gonna skim through them because, stick to the fundamentals and it should be easy.
Yep.
So fundamentals, two become one, right? So you give your entire self to your spouse gives their entire self to you, and you make vows. The vows are free consent, full consent, total gift of yourself, faithful to your spouse and your spouse only, and fruitful, open to kids. And you will uphold these vows until death, through good times, bad times, sickness, health, richer, poorer, don't matter. You're going to stick with this person until you die. Those are the vows, right? So, adultery. Adultery is when you go and have relations with another person who isn't your spouse. You've breached your vows. You promised not to do this. Don't do this. Divorce. You said you'd stick with this person until you die. Stick to your vows. Polygamy. First of all, it's a breach against the two become one fundamental, and it's a breach of your vow to be faithful to one person and one person alone. Incest is when you do
intimate relations between relatives or in-laws, like in a degree that prohibits marriage between them.
Yeah, don't do that. I really hope I don't have to explain why this is bad. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Moving on. Free union. What is a free union? Is it? Oh, it's just like, what is it like when you
consent.
just
like they openly
no the not consent. 2390. What is a free union? Right. So, all right. When a man and women live together and they have sex and they don't commit to marriage.
Right.
What does that mean? Right. So, you're not committing to giving, like you're not making the commitment, and so you can't give a full gift of yourself, because if you're going to give a gift, you have to let go of the gift, and so you're not committing to the full union, which means you're only really having the physical union, the rest of it. Final one on this list, cohabitation / trial marriages, which is where you live together and then you say you're going to get married later. This comes under the free union a bit, right? You're not committing, but you're still trying to make the gift, but it's not legit. And I've written here that they deny the vows before they're even made, right? Because they're basically saying like, oh, I'll like go through the motions of marriage, I'll give myself to quote unquote, but I'm not actually going to live up to the idea of the vows. I'm not going to stick with if things go bad. I'm not going to be faithful to the intention unless you win me over. That's a harsh, that's a harsh exaggeration, right? But like, yeah, it's setting that condition on a state of living that, like is meant to be expressed within the vows. You're denying the vows before you make them by doing this, which sounds high level, but again, like sex demands the complete gift of yourself, right? That's why there's a lot of pain about making all this, not making out, what's the word? Hookups, one night stands, yeah. That's why this sort of thing gets real painful real quick.
Even like if you say like you're going to live together, but you're not going to engage in the act, like it probably it doesn't work. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it never works.
So yeah, in short, it's fundamentals again. So I'm gonna say them again. When you get sex is, by the nature of what it is, sex demands like a complete gift of persons. And that includes emotions, mental. It's not just a physical pleasure.
Yep.
So it's a complete union of persons. Two people become one person, for a better word. Two become one again. To protect this, we then shrine it with vows and promises, and you got to stick to your promises. The Catholic vows and promises are a lofty ideal, perhaps, but they are the ideal, right? Like this is biased personal opinion. Is there really like a sense of love greater than the marriage vows beyond the cross, right? And then we haven't even spoken about how marriage involves the cross. Husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church and all that. So yeah, and yeah, be open to kids.
Yeah.
And be open to kids, but don't demand them. And there you go. There's your fundamentals.
Yeah.
How to marriage 101. Now I just got to get me a girlfriend and live it. Yeah.
Twill happen.
In due time. Speaking of time, we are way over. So let's get into prayer intentions.
I'm going first, I guess. Okay, first.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess keeping in top with this commandment. So we pray that everyone that is not yet married is able to respect the sanctity of chastity, and if they are in a relationship, or even if they're not at the moment, that they're able to respect that like the sanctity of marriage, that it's a union between man and woman, and everything that comes with it. So the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, like links that come with being one, are respected in society, and that we're all able to help do that. Yeah, yep, that's the commandment. And that everyone in marriage as well is able to continue obeying this commandment. Like this, the story is not over once you get married. We pray that all married couples are open to life, and basically they open to receiving that gift of a child. So if that be the result.
Yep. You pretty much covered everything. Old standard, right? Wars are still going on, so I pray for those to end. And I also pray, like, these are things that I can't talk about with people in real life, yeah? So I pray, like Desh was saying, I pray that those who aren't married come to learn this and live this out. And, for those who are married, that learn this and live this out. Like, I can't change anyone. So, but I don't really. Yeah.
Everyone has free will.
Yeah,
but it's up to us to exercise that free will out of love of God, and for the people that we care about.
Yeah. If you're listening and you know who you are, and you're upset that I'm saying all this stuff and I never spoke to you directly, like, look, I know you enough to know that you probably aren't open to hearing this from me anyway, so sorry. But yeah, praying for you. And on that note, dour note, sad note, my throat is sore and we're over time. Catch you in the next one. Hopefully the rest of the commandments aren't so controversial.
Alrighty, thanks for joining us, guys. We'll see you in the next one. God bless.
God bless.
See ya.
Bye.